Welcome to my lecture on subject-verb agreement. For this segment, we're going to examine one rule at a time with a sample that illustrates that rule. Let's start with something a little funny, at least it is if you're an English major. Here we have a subject and verb that are not in agreement. What does that mean? It means that one of them needs to change. To make this sentence correct, you could either say, "The big dog runs," or "the big dogs run." Why is that? What is this having an S on one of the words all about? To understand that, we have to understand the rules. The main rule is that a singular subject has to have a verb with an S at the end. A plural subject, or a subject that has more than one, has to have a verb without the S. This is fairly standard rule that most everyone knows and understands, but what happens when you're writing at a more complex level and aren't sure about that number in the subject? That is where the following rules will come in handy. The first rule, two or more subjects joined by and are considered plural and require a verb form without the S. We're still on familiar territory here. These two samples both have that plural subject because they're joined with the use of the word and. In these cases, because the subject is plural, there is no S on the verb. Sometimes our subjects don't follow the and rule. In this rule, if a subject is modified by the word each or every, that subject is singular and will take a verb that ends in S. Well, what does that mean? It means that even though we have the word and, we also have a word that notes that you're examining each subject separately. Because you're looking at each individual boy and each individual girl, the subject is singular. The verb needs to have an S in this case. To complicate things further, those conjunctions can mean the difference between a singular subject and a plural subject. What does that mean? That means that you need to understand which conjunction you have and are using and whether it means that you're joining your subject or keeping them separate. With this rule, if plural subjects are joined by or, nor, or but, the verb must only agree with the subject closest to it. Let's take a look at each example for this one. Either Bob or his brother walks to the store. Because brother is closest to the verb, that's the word that you'll use to determine if the verb gets an S or no S. Neither Bob nor his brothers walk to the store. But if we change brother to brothers, it means that the verb does not get the S. With a sample joined by a conjunction, but to show contrast, brothers is the subject. So the verb does not get the S. In our last sample, we change brothers to brother. As brother is singular, the verb gets the S added on. As you progress in your writing, you'll find that you need more complex thoughts and ideas. In these cases, it's important to be able to recognize your simple subject and your simple predicate so that you can know that your verb is agreeing with the actual subject of the sentence. Well, what do I mean by that? Let's look at this sample. The verb must agree only with the subject it belongs to. The biggest problem we face is all the squirrels digging in my planters all summer. You have two subjects right next to each other. Did you catch that? Let's take another look. The biggest problem we face is all the squirrels digging in my planters all summer. You have a small thought within a larger one. The main subject is problem, and the verb that goes with it is. The other subject is we, and the verb that accompanies that subject is face. Each subject must match up to the verb that it was intended for. This next rule is important to understand as you develop more complex writing. The subject of a verb is never in a prepositional phrase or verb phrase. Make sure that you have identified the correct simple subject in the sentence for verb agreement. Let's look at our samples. The mother duck with all her little ducklings waddles around the parking lot. See how being able to identify the simple subject and simple predicate come in handy here? Our simple subject is duck, and that is singular. The verb does need an S. With all of her little ducklings are both prepositional phrase. And these prepositional phrases give us more information about the duck itself, but they are not the subject. Our next rule looks at infinitive pronouns, or pronouns that do not identify an exact person, place, or thing. In order to understand the rule, you have to understand indefinite pronouns. I have here a table for you to help you better understand these words. If you look at each word, you'll notice that they are not very specific. Who are you talking about? Everybody? We aren't given a name. We aren't given an occasion. We know nothing about this person. Where are you going? Somewhere. This somewhere could be multiple places if you have a lot of errands to run, or it could be one place. We don't really know. What are you going to do today? Anything. But that could be a lot, or it could just be one thing. We don't really know for sure. They're not really clear. They're not really specific. They are indefinite. As such, indefinite pronouns are usually singular and take a verb form that ends in S. Everyone walks around town. Everything comes back eventually. While some indefinite pronouns are set on whether they are regular or singular or plural, there are others that will either be singular or plural, depending on the object of the prepositional phrase. These words are always about a number or an amount, such as all, half, some, none, most, part. Let's see how this works. Some of the students are gone. Because students is plural, it tells you that some is more than one. That means that the verb does not get the S. Some of the cake is gone. Because cake is singular, it tells you that some in this cake is singular. That means that the verb form does not get the S. Unlike our earlier samples, this last one with the mother duckling and all her little ducklings, we actually need the prepositional phrase to know how many all is referring to. The mother duck and all of her ducklings waddle around the parking lot. In this case, it is multiple ducklings, which is plural, which means that we do need the verb form without the S. The next rule is referring to a collective noun. A collective noun is when you are referring to one group as a whole. When a collective noun such as family, group, committee, or a class is the subject, the verb will end in S, and this is because they are seen as one collective group. In our sample, our simple subject is family, so the verb does need the S. The prepositional phrase does not change the fact that we are referring to one large group of people. I'd like to discuss with you the concept of measurements. When the subject is a unit of measurement of time, distance, money, weight, etc., the unit is considered singular, and the verb will end in S. 10 pounds of chocolate is too much to eat in one sitting. 13 feet of kite string tangles very easily. With this rule, we are looking at gerunds. These are ing words. They look like a verb, but they act like a noun. When you have an ing word, you follow the standard of a normal singular subject or compound subject. That means that if you have one gerund, you have a singular subject, and your verb needs an S. If you have two gerunds connected by and, you have a compound subject, and there is no S on the verb. For example, running with ducks is my favorite sport. One gerund, verb has an S. Running to the store and flying through the air are my favorite sports. Two gerunds connected by and. Your verb does not have an S. This rule looks at sentences that have both an independent and a dependent clause that use a relative pronoun. In other words, there's the main subject, and then there's another subject inside of a bigger sentence. In these cases, you have to match up the correct subject with the correct predicate and make each set match. Our first simple sample, the subject is girls, and it matches up with the verb are. The relative pronoun is who, and that matches up with eat. Since girls is plural, it is understood that who, the relative pronoun telling us more about those girls, is also plural. In our second sample, the subject is girl, and that matches up with the verb is. The relative pronoun did not change. However, the noun it is telling us about did. It is now girl, a singular individual. Because of this, the pronoun who is also singular, and so the verb has an S. This rule is an important one. I often see mistakes in subject-verb agreement that center around this rule specifically. This one has to do with the use of where, there, and here. These three words change the normal construct of the sentence. Instead of the subject coming before the verb, these three words cause the subject to come after the verb. Let's look at these samples for more understanding. The first sample starts with where and is immediately followed by the verb is. If you don't know to watch out for this, you might think that where is your subject, but it's not. The actual subject is sweater. Errors in subject-verb agreement are of more common occurrence with the use of there, as we see in our second sample. We have the word there indicating the location. This is immediately followed by the verb. If one is not careful, they might miss that the actual subject is sweaters, and so the verb has to agree with sweaters. Our last rule to do with odd numbers that have an S on them at all times, even though they're considered singular. You can tell these S words are singular because if you take away the S, you no longer have a noun. Economics is one such word. Without the S, we have economic, which is an adjective. Mumps and measles are diseases that would sound odd without their S. A mump would be a synonym for a bump, not a disease. And who's ever heard of a measle? Kind of sounds like a weasel. When you have the news, which comes on every night, without the S, you would simply have new, which is referring to the age of something or how long something has been around. As such, these words do need their S, but they're also singular. Confused yet? Yeah, I know. English is a little bit complicated. That's okay. You can watch this video as many times as you need to review these rules and understand them. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please make sure you reach out to your professor using the email icon in your learning management system. Thanks so much, and I'll catch you on the flip side.